The space between has been in existence for like about 9 months, but conceptually for like probably years. And the design element, or the name kind of emerged as like to kind of honor that journey in life, the kind of unknown, like life is a space between, and it's ultimately how you navigate. We've had some really interesting kind of music things. We've had like some really nice art exhibitions and photography exhibitions, and just like, I'm not really too sure what can emerge from it, but I suppose what brought me into this space, like funnily enough, is this space is probably built out of like trauma on some level, so like the last space I had, which you probably remember, Mabo's, which was a much more of a kind of a punky party space, an old warehouse, and when I loved that for me was probably like the most fulfilling thing that I'd done in my life, was to kind of like, to kind of run that space and have a space that like was able to add value to lots of different kind of demographics and in lots of different ways. And it was playful, which I liked, so losing that space, even though we fought very hard for it, but losing that space left like a void for me. And weirdly, I kind of found yoga and meditation and things like that to be really helpful to get me through that challenge. Like, so I used to cycle past this all the time on the way to work, this kind of weird, like one-dimensional kind of garage frontage in the middle of what was almost a derelict street. So yeah, I kind of started knocking on the door here to sort of, and I met the owner and we agreed a deal after a long time. And even when I got the keys to it, I still wasn't like entirely sure what the space was going to be. I didn't quite know, but that like the void of losing that space fed into the delivery of this space. And in that space, like we fought really hard against how the city was developing, and it was developing in Docklands very much around a commercial district, and even though there was a strategic development plan put on the area at its core, saying it was kind of for the people and to support kind of culture, it just squeezed out everything of value. Like we got squeezed out, and in it yoga got squeezed out, and the factory got squeezed out, and loads of different things of value got squeezed out, and nothing of value emerged, so that like, that I still really feel that, like, and then this space is kind of like a sort of the battle we fought in that space was quite punky and ranty, and that won't really get you anywhere. So in this space it felt like it might be a place that is a little more sophisticated, that can maybe present a space for discussion and dialogue around what could potentially emerge to help rebalance that equality in terms of how a city develops. So it is more kind of enriched and integrated and supportive for all factions that make something of value, because it does feel like it can get imbalanced. And like even trying to create this space was incredibly difficult, and it's going to be incredibly difficult to keep it operating in the current kind of economic climate, because it's very like the cities aren't set up to support kind of more creative spaces, they're set up for kind of the maximization of a square foot, which doesn't quite translate into value, We initially had the idea of this kind of the Venn diagram, the two circles, and where they kind of meet, that little space between. But that's the beauty in life, I think, where you kind of have those moments of like, you might find in a creative collaboration, like, that introspection of your own journey, and also kind of the connecting with other people who are similarly on their journey, which is kind of a fascinating element, that there's 7 billion of us and everyone has a different path to walk, so you can't be too prescriptive to other people. But there's like certain underlying absolutes probably that we can all feed off, but you have to figure it out for yourself, so. And he was like, the way I see this journey is like, it's like we're both riding this one motorcycle along the edge of a mountain, and on one side is a very, very steep drop into the unknown, the abyss, but at the very end of this road is our destination, and we may get there or we may not get there. And that was kind of where at that point, we realized that circles weren't going to work, that we'd over-circled. So we decided we would kind of scrap the circle, and that's how it ended up in the, and just that tiny little line. So just the most simple little thing. So it was the space between was what emerged out of that. And then we were playing around with these little patterns, and then this guy, which is the little pine cone, just emerged out of like this to and fro of playing around with a bit of geometry. And the pine cone kind of traditionally has represented like the pineal over the years. It's been the symbol of the pineal gland, which is sort of like, it's like a bit of a nod to the unknown, which again is quite space between-esque. It's that unknown, what we don't quite understand but know to be true. You know, like it's inherent in all of us what that is. You can't quite describe it, and you can't quite put your finger on it, you know. So this little fella, this pine cone emerged, and we were both like, yes, that's the one. And then that's how we ended up with the pine cone. I mean, one of the trips with this that was important for me, and it's sort of the tagline for the space, is like to keep it playful. And it's sort of hard when you try to, like, on one hand, you're trying to do something of like that has depth to it. You can kind of get lost in that. We sort of pivoted online very quickly. I saw in myself my own ability to pause, you know, and it was taking on like a bigger project than I thought, that with a lot of moving parts. So it didn't quite pause, like it sort of, but after I almost like burnt myself out though, trying to do that and avoid the pause. And I did take a moment like of late, like to kind of just to maybe try and recalibrate in terms of its direction. Like it's tricky to do something, you know, you've got that kind of mix of energy from the commercial viability of it to its purpose, to the playfulness, to the depth, to not being too prescriptive. All of those things try to kind of find its way, and there's a lot of cul-de-sacs, which I'm sure there'll be a lot ahead as well. But I don't quite know how how it's going to emerge. I mean, in the yoga sense, like there's going to be this hybrid model, I guess, that's going to emerge out of. It's so funny how kind of it's a real sign of how we're fit for anything, you know, where like, I mean, the thought of doing yoga online 3 months ago would appall most people, and like that in a day people pivoted into it, which shows our ability to adapt, which I think is fascinating. It's probably one of my favorite things about the whole like experience was how people had to adapt really quickly, and that triggering that adaptive function is very human, you know, and you feel quite alive like when you're sort of doing that. How that now kind of like takes shape, I'm not entirely sure, you know, but I'd say like for the peak moment probably of like our output was the binaural sort of experiences. I thought that was really quite fascinating, like, and then you guys coming in today to record that, you know, that was kind of, I liked the energy of today. It felt like a real nice little moment, you know. There's kind of a tangibility in those moments or something. That was nice. One of the first things to kick back in, and I loved when the cranes kind of stopped, probably because of, you know, the development around the last premises, but there was something really serene about the city when all that stuff kind of stopped. And it was the first thing to kick back in were the cranes, I noticed. And like, you know, when you kind of look at a city and you see all these cranes, like it's, but also like people, weirdly, I think, you know, when you talk to builders or you talk to developers, like, and you talk to the city council, like everybody kind of wants something of value, weirdly. So it's not like people don't want it. Like people actually kind of want it, yet like it's, you know, a lot of times the systems that kind of emerge don't always marry with people's values. I think that's kind of a fascinating like phenomenon where like systems should match values, like, you know, it's weird that they don't. Like everyone supports these systems, you know, yet we kind of will never claim to like be part of it. And weirdly, if you're to deep dive down into your own internal battle, you know, all of these little micro moments, like on very, very subtle levels, like result in supporting these systems, you know. So, and that's very much kind of what the space between represents, I suppose, is that dive in there to find the kind of gold. But I think like in that journey lies the kind of the gold somewhere, which is kind of what the space between represents in its own way.